So, welcome back and welcome to the beautiful city of Munich. We are here at the Steinhuber Miniblock with Anna Rivas, and it's a lovely sunny day today.
Yes, quite warm.
Anna, could you tell us a bit about what the Steinhuber Miniblock is and what we're doing here today under the sun and whether or not this will go away in the future?
Okay, so Steinhuber Miniblock, it's a street experiment that is part of my PhD thesis. And the idea of this project is to create more livable places for the neighborhood, to enhance the quality of the public space, to promote sustainable mobility, and also to increase greenery on the streets. So this is a temporary intervention, as the name it's stating. It's an experiment. We're gonna see what is working, what is not working, and then we are evaluating it, and we're gonna see what do we take, if possible, to implement it next year or not. So the experiment has been here in place since the end of July, and we will remove it by the end of October.
Wow. So, a bit of a background on this project of yours, perhaps. I was curious about when you came to Munich yourself and how you got involved in this business of transforming streets all over the city.
I arrived in 2019 to Munich, and in 2020 I started working at the chair, mainly for CLEAR, an European project about street experiments. And the idea was that our partner cities, Munich, Amsterdam, and Milan, would experiment, but we found ourselves in this period of uncertainty.
Hmm.
And we start creating a website to share all the knowledge that we had until that moment. But actually, the pandemic boost like this type of interventions. So before you could see some parklets, some interventions here and there, but suddenly, like there was a boom of this type of interventions. I started working, and mainly I was doing just research, but I'm an architect and I like to do things. I like to see things on the street, or building things to make them functional, to solve probably something. And that's why after 2 years being at the chair, I also had this curiosity of doing something myself. I was involved on the topics a while ago, and I was missing that part. So last year in 2021, the city of Munich had this parklet program in which citizens could apply for a parklet, and well, we had also this summer school. And I was thinking, okay, there's a lot of students coming to the city, and we should do something together with them, not just teach them, but also close that gap between research and practice. And that's when we had our first parklet in Steinhardstraße, just the first one there. And I think that's how everything started. That was the first parklet, and as we know, like we were thinking, what could be the next step? What are we gonna do for the next summer school? But also like personal ideas, like how can we upscale these? And yeah, then it was like, okay, what can we do next? A second parklet, or maybe the entire street? And there were these thoughts through the whole year. And then finally, this year we saw, where we knew that we were doing summer school, but the city of Munich also come up with this call from they were looking for some ideas from the residents for public space to enhance the quality. And when I saw it, I was like, we're going for it. And I just like asked within the team who's supporting the idea. And I was very happy to see some of my colleagues saying like, hey, I can, I want to be part of it. And on the other hand, also, as you know, from WOW, Running Utopian, there was Benjamin. And we got together and we come up with this proposal for the city. So we apply the call was out in the beginning of January. We applied the beginning of February when it was close, and we got to know that we got the project by mid of May. So from mid of May till the end of July, we had to finalize the project because there was just a concept, but nothing else. And we lost, I would say we lost some months just waiting for an answer. And then when they said, okay, yeah, like your project's gonna get funded, we were like, oh my God, we need to come up with like our entire project, but finalize it. We just had the idea of putting a parklet, but we didn't know anything else. So that's, for example, when Elisa helped us to design these parklets, or she was designing these parklets, and she come up with this idea of making modular elements, like the boxes for the trees, like everything fall together, like they offer us the trees. She also come up with this idea of having these urban gardening beds that can be used within the parklet, but also on the mobility hubs. And yeah, that's how everything starts
Wow.
baking.
So this is quite the journey going from
Yeah.
basically there was nothing here a few years ago, and then to one parklet, and now there's, was it 8?
Now we have, considering the
Uh-huh.
existing parklet, we have 10 parklets, and we have 2 green corridors or mini green corridors, and 2 mobility hubs. So we recover from the parklets, I think, 103 square meters, and from the mobility hubs, 113. So in total, we have recovered 216 square meters for, like, from car parking, for other uses and activities for people. And when we do the street closure in the other side of the street, yeah, then we have, of course, more square meters. It's not about the square meters, but it's also nice to quantify that. But it's also like to think like how people start using the street in a different way. But yeah.
And it's quite the teamwork to get all of this to happen.
Yes.
So, in summary, right there, to make this all happen, it was EIT Urban Mobility who funded the summer school, and when there's a lot of things coming by, we're just going to keep going. So, who funded the summer school, which brought in 30 students, 30, 35,
Yeah.
which can then help with the construction of the street. And that combined with Wow Utopian, who designed the parklets and
Yeah.
prepared everything.
Yeah.
So we don't have to do too much of the detail work. So you had the students, you had the people who designed the parklets, and then you had the staff who was running this, plus the researchers who were then evaluating
Yeah.
whether or not this worked or not.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So you touched on the staff, you touched on the students, and then the people who designed the parklets. Could you talk a bit more about what you're doing, which is currently the research side, before this all goes away for the winter?
Yeah. So in terms of research and evaluation of the project, so we did a before survey where Catherine and David Duran and also some students helped me to come up with a before survey to collect some feedback from the residents before the implementation of the project. Right now, in the next week, we're going to run the during survey. So we want to compare the perceptions of the residents in comparing these 3 main goals that we had: public space, mobility, and greenery, and to see what are their like opinions and what do they what's their feedback. We're also doing some observations to see which type of users are like using the space. We are also checking which type of activities are happening. So is people reading, but there's also, the other day we saw a lady with a tripod having a video call, a work video call, and we have seen people with their laptops, people having lunch. We have seen people with their kids in this, like with the stroll. We have seen a lot of things happening here. Some neighbors that bring their Aperol spritz and they're just drinking something in the afternoon. It's really great to see all those things happening. Also, we have the ping pong table. So there's also like these game playful aspect in our intervention, and sorry, that's for observations.
Yeah.
And we are also photo documenting everything. We are going to come up with some data, quantify some aspects of the, as I was mentioning before, like square meters for specific aspects. We're gonna see like the potential if these trees were permanently implemented here, what would be that benefit for the street, and yeah.
It's a lot of work doing all of this, right? So
Yeah.
What got you into street experiments in the first place?
So initially, so I'm an architect, and I did my master's in graphic design in London, and I was a bit stuck, I have to say. So
Mm.
I love graphic design, and I love designing, but I come from this background where everything had to function. And when I started doing my masters, they asked me to experiment, and I didn't know how to experiment. I had no idea how to experiment for graphic design. I was a bit frustrated, and why start studying graphic design is because this Paseo Copacabana in Brazil with the waves, black and white in this promenade and boulevard. I wanted to do something like that. I wanted to overlap architecture and graphic design, but in my master's, like, I would need some permits and budget to do that. So I was thinking what I can do, and then I come up with this idea of using duct tape, which was quite cheap for me as a student. And I lived in Camden, and there were a lot of parks, little parks or pocket parks, but they were not used. So there were some benches, there was a bit sad, people was not sitting there, people was not using them. And I thought, okay, maybe I can just see how people use the space and try to activate it or reactivate it by graphic interventions. So I bought duct tape, very colorful ones, and I started doing some interventions in the street, and that's how I start getting into this world of tactical urbanism.
So then, there was zero interaction with the bureaucracy, right? Some
Yeah.
duct tape, and you all had a fun day,
Yeah.
and then you walked away from it,
Exactly.
hopefully making the space better. So as you scaled up on the permanence and also the complexity of the street interventions, you have had to deal with more bureaucracy,
Yes.
right? Like you couldn't just plop down a parklet and expect the city officials to say nothing. And
At least in Munich.
it is in Munich, right? So there's regulations about
Yeah.
that. You have to go through the official channels.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, I wasn't involved in that whole process, but from what I understand, it was very time consuming. It was frustrating at times.
Yeah.
Could you walk us through that? And also, if you have any advice for people who are partaking on dealing with the local bureaucracy to make their lives easier.
Oh.
Yeah.
I don't know, I guess it depends on each context, on each city, on each requirements. But in our case, for example, we received the funding, but that didn't imply the permit to do the experiment, which we thought it was, but actually not. So it was just, you have the funding. So from May till mid-end May till end of July, besides of finalizing the intervention and producing the parklets, we also needed to request the permits. And it was not just a general permit for the entire intervention, but the parklets require one permit, and the mobility hubs is another permit. So for the mobility hubs or the mobility aspects, we needed to get in touch with the Mobilitätsreferat, and that's one department. And for the parklets, it's another department. And you just cannot say, I want to put a mobility hub, and that's all. You need to come up with the specific idea that you have. What do you want to put there? You need to come up with the plan and everything very detailed. The same for the parklets. You need to come up with the design of the parklet, submit it. You need to have a event concept. You need to come up with a context plan, measures. You need to integrate everything for those permits. So it's a lot of work, and without the help of the entire team, this would not have been possible. And the third type of permit, it's the events permit. So besides of the intervention permits, we also wanted to close the street because that was the original idea, to have Steinhuber Platz. And since the beginning, we said we're going to have two events because it's very important to activate the street, not just to put something, but to attract people. And that's another permits that you need to request. So it's a lot. And if someone is going to do this anywhere else, I don't know what my advice would be. I think they just you need to be aware all the time of everything that it implies. What helped me was to have a timeline where I put before, during, and after, and I separated by chapters. In this sense, like set guidelines kit helped me a lot. So we have these sections, like how to get started, like who's in my team, communication, citizen engagement, evaluation. So I put like what is after, before, during, and after, and I created a Miro board, and I put there everything that needs to happen within like those aspects. And I think like good project management. It sounds so boring, but you need to be all the time very awake.
Wow. So then through this process, you were able to gather your findings as you went along and add that to the set, which is the street experiment tools
Yeah,
toolkit.
yeah.
And now you have quite a comprehensive manual, basically, for people who want to partake on this journey. Could you tell us about what the set toolkit is and what went into the development of that?
So set guidelines kit is this guide with considerations that we come up with, in which you like anyone who wants to implement a street experiment, from a resident to an organization or to a city, can have a look at and say, okay, it's not a step by step, but it's considerations. So in terms of citizen participation, and it gives you a window, or like it gives you a range of ideas that you can do in terms of citizen participation. Same for communication. It tells you some ideas for doing for doing communication, evaluating the project. It tells you like when to do that, etc., etc. So practically I took everything from that guide, and actually right now I'm seeing like what I was missing when we did that guide, and maybe I want to complement it. So for example, in terms of insurances, here in Germany you need to have an insurance. That's also something I forgot to mention.
Yeah.
You need to issue an insurance, and there's Simone, for example, who helped me a lot. Like Simone was checking out which insurances we could come up with. So at the end, there was initially the idea to having an insurance just for the parklets and another one for the events. But at the end, finally, we found an insurance company that it's like insuring
Insurance,
the
everything.
entire
Comprehensive, yeah.
the entire experiment. And I think we don't have that in our guide. So right now, like I'm comparing my own method, like with actually doing it, and I want to complement it.
That's wonderful that this resource is out there. We'll link it to the show notes below,
Yes,
so
please.
everyone can have access. And basically, it's a guide that not prevents, but helps document the lessons you've learned along the way, so that others can have hopefully an easier time at it. Right?
Yes.
So let's go to then this idea of pushback. So this you've built it, and now it's here, and now these parklets are taking over quite a few parking spaces, right? As a consequence.
Yeah.
And we all know that people are very protective of their parking spaces in general. So how has that played out in this very urban, right, Munich context?
Yeah, so Munich, and especially also this neighborhood, has a lot of parking pressure. So this project is removing 22 parking spaces, including the original parklet. And yeah, so we have been communicating what we want to do since we got the approval, like 1 week and a half after. We put some posters in the entrance of the houses just to let the people know that something was going to happen, and we put our email address to receive any feedback. And of course we received some complaints, and they mainly go for losing parking. But on the other hand, like they can still like park in other area, like in other streets further than actually parking in front of their houses. So that's the biggest fear, losing car parking. And how to deal with that? Well, actually, it's like showing the residents that you care about their opinions, that you also care about, like that you are considering that fear into account for the feedback. Maybe next year we don't take out it's just an idea, no? Maybe next year you don't take out so many car parking spots, to have a compromise, because its acceptance is very important. So that's something that you need to deal with. I would say that from the feedback that we receive, like 1.5 out of 5, it's negative, and it's mainly about parking. We have received also a lot of compliments about the project, and that's very nice. Fear of noise is another thing, but we have also received feedback that says that the street actually is quieter. But I think if I can give an advice is to take the negative feedback into account and to reply also with data, or like always to try to show up to and to have a conversation if they are up to, like you should also be up to have a conversation with the neighbors.
Yeah, and on the success side, as you mentioned, I think it's a testament that today we couldn't find an empty parklet to do this podcast. We were walking around and they were all taken. So
It's
finally,
Friday.
it's Friday, and finally we found this one. Like, okay, we can set a camera down and do this. So they're all occupied.
Yes.
And people are using them. So
Yeah.
that was a pleasant surprise for us.
Yeah.
Okay, so good and bad, and now I want to ask you finally about the remaking the street summer school.
Yeah.
Right. So we've been organizing that, or you've been doing the bulk of organizing of that summer school for a couple of years now, and the students in that summer school have contributed to the physical building of this street, which is a hands-on approach that's different from the usual classroom learning experience. So how was it on your end, working on the summer school overall?
Well, I love it. Sometimes it can become very stressful, but without the help of the students, nothing of this would be possible. And I think it's also a very enriching experience for them, not just to be sitting in a classroom and learn about these, but also to have hands-on activities, and also to learn about the entire process, and to see how all these falls together into the day that you are actually implementing and you have it there. I think that's one of the nicest things of our summer school, I would say.
Yeah, so thank you for all the students who've come by.
Yes, thank you. Two generations.
So like
of
65 students now.
Yes, more or less.
And if you're interested in remaking the street summer school next year, which is be 2024 or maybe beyond, then the website link is remakingthestreet.com, and it's open to basically anyone who has an interest in urbanism.
Yeah.
And it's a week in Munich and a week in Rotterdam.
Yeah.
So I feel like Wagner is getting a bit antsy. So
Yeah.
I think it's that's good. Thank you for coming on this podcast and talking to me.
Thank you,
And
George.
I am glad that this weather has been so wonderful.
Me too. When we were implementing the experiment, do you remember it was raining so
Yeah.
much?
So finally getting to see this being put to use
Yes.
when it's not raining,
Yeah.
and it's nice weather outside.
And thank you, George, also for coming and helping me to record the intervention for my PhD.
Yeah.
And yeah.
So there might be a tour of it coming out soon,
Yeah,
right? Led by
exactly.
Anna, so we can see in detail what this is all about.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, George.